Morning, everybody. On February 29th, I provided you all a briefing regarding the officer-involved shooting that resulted in the death of Kionte Spencer. At that time, I described the criminal and administrative investigations that had been started and advised you that the results would be provided upon completion. Joining me today is Mr. Randy Leach. Mr. Randy Leach is the Commonwealth attorney for Roanoke County. At this time, our investigations have been completed and we are ready to provide the result as promised. The investigation took approximately 8 weeks for us to do our work. Mr. Leach and his staff have spent the last several weeks doing theirs. While this is a lengthy period of time, I think it compares well to similar investigations that have occurred in other areas. Quite frankly, I think we've been able to get it done in a very reasonable period of time. And for that reason, I'd like to thank the Virginia Department of Forensic Science, the Medical Examiner's Office, and the Virginia State Police, who all provided some assistance during the course of this investigation for doing that in a very timely manner, which helped us complete our work in a reasonable period of time. So what we're going to do this morning will be several things. I'm going to provide the facts that had been determined during the investigation. At that point, Mr. Leach is going to brief you on his review and conclusions. I'm going to then come back and discuss the findings of our administrative investigation and a number of issues that have arisen during the course of this investigation. We have intentionally, over the last several months, not responded to individual questions and issues surrounding this case simply because we need to conduct a complete and thorough investigation before we release results. That's why we're here this morning. Because of that, we have quite a bit of information to share with you. It's going to take us a little bit of time to do that, so you might want to get comfortable if you can. Before we start, I'd like to thank our community. We've gotten a great deal of support since this incident occurred, and all of our members appreciate the fact that most people in our community support what we do. All right. The criminal investigation included an examination of all evidence at the scene, video footage from police vehicles and a bank ATM, statements from officers and witnesses, interviews with persons who had recent contact with Mr. Spencer, and background investigation or background information that was obtained from Henry County Department of Social Services and Intercept Youth Services. All of the officers present at the time of this incident voluntarily submitted to interviews during the criminal investigation. Let's start with timeline. On February 26, 2016, between the hours of 16:30 and 17:15, Mr. Spencer visited an acquaintance in the area of Garth Mill Road and obtained a Crossman C11 CO2 pistol, which was not functional. He gave that acquaintance no information about the intended use of that pistol. Between 18:30 and 1900 hours, Mr. Spencer was observed at his residence, which was the Youth Quest independent or group home facility in the 4700 block of Garth Mill Road. He was seen in his room, and counselors noted that they advised him that he was not supposed to leave at that time. It is a group home. There are some rules that have to be followed, and at this time, Mr. Spencer was not supposed to be leaving the residence, and this was documented in a log that's maintained by the staff. At 19:15, the Roanoke County Emergency Communication Center received this call.
Where's your emergency?
I need Roanoke County Police.
Okay, what's the address where you need them?
I'm in front of the Chase Corners Kroger. There's a man walking around with a gun, opening a mask on.
What's he look like?
He's a black man with a red bandana in front of his face with headphones in.
What kind of gun is it?
It's a Glock.
Okay, is he pointing it at anybody or is he just walking around with it?
He's got it out and he's waving it around, pointing at a car. bandana around his face.
And where exactly in front of the store is he?
He's walking right now in front of Walgreens.
And which direction is he walking?
He's walking towards Electric Road, the intersection of Ramsden and Electric.
Okay. How long has he been out there? Do you know?
I don't know, but I just left Kroger, and I was pulling out, and then I saw him walking around.
Is it a black gun?
Yes.
Do you still have eyes on him?
No, ma'am. He looked at me and pointed at my car, so I drove away. I took a left in the right lane.
Okay. As a result of that call, 6 Roanoke County police officers responded to this area. The first arrived within 2 minutes. Mr. Spencer, who matched the description that you heard, was confronted by the first officer at 1917 hours on Brambleton Avenue, approaching Electric Road. And that's what you see in this picture. My pointer works. Mr. Spencer is going to be approximately right there. He steps off the shoulder, or off the road into the curb, or up on the curb, and turns towards the officers approaching. Subsequently gestures to the officer that's approaching, and turns around and starts walking across the grass. You can see him in this picture looking at the officer. This is front. You can see the top of his hat, headphones, and that's the chest area of his sweatshirt. Obviously, it's dark, so darker clothes don't appear very well. He spins around and starts to walk northbound on Electric Road. Officers follow. This is the first point where you can start to see a handgun in his right hand. And at this point, officers are noticing that. Officers are approaching with their sirens activated and lights activated. Multiple officers at this point are giving Mr. Spencer direction to drop the gun, but using both their voices, and one officer used a public address system that is in our cars. Now, at this point, you can clearly see the gun in his right hand. Again, walking northbound on Electric Road. Looks back at us again as responding officers continue to give him direction. Again, gun in right hand. Officers are continuing at this point to give him direction to drop that gun. Now, at this point, he's approaching Normandy Lane. This is an access road that takes you into the Cave Springs Shopping Center from the side, and there's also an access road to the apartment complex that's in that area. Mr. Spencer is approaching now a van with a citizen trying to exit that roadway. We have not, at this point, been able to identify the person driving that van. They left the scene after the incident occurred, and we were not able to talk to them. However, it's pretty clear what they saw from this. Here he is crossing Normandy Lane, looking back at officers again. It is very difficult to see. However, Mr. Spencer is wearing a red bandana that is covering his face to the bridge of his nose. The officers on scene provided that information in their statement. You can barely see that with a close-up in these pictures. It's possible that when Ms. Whitaker emails you the pictures, you might get a little bit better resolution and be able to see that. So now, past that vehicle at Normandy Lane, looks back at the officers for a fifth time. Gun is still in hand. At this point, one officer makes an attempt to deploy a taser. That attempt is not effective. Now, subsequent to that, Mr. Spencer turns towards the officers. He turns and continues to walk away, and a second attempt at deploying the taser is made. Now, it was also not effective. At this time, Mr. Spencer begins to turn at officers again to face them. He raises the handgun, his right arm in the direction of the responding officers, and shots were fired. This is a very grainy picture, but is the best close-up we have. The final frames before the shots were fired, you can see to a limited extent that Mr. Spencer's arms have moved from his side, but it is not possible in this picture to see a handgun, and I don't think the email pictures are really going to help you much more in that regard. Now, 4 of the 6 responding officers were in a position to see Mr. Spencer at the time the shots were fired. All 4 of them stated that they saw his arm being raised. A total of 3 shots were fired by 2 police officers. 1 shot from each officer struck Mr. Spencer, so a total of 2 shots struck him. He was struck in the hip and upper chest or shoulder area, as has been previously reported, at just after 19-20 hours. So approximately 2.5 minutes after the first officer contacted Mr. Spencer, the shots were fired. During this time, he was continually being given direction to put the gun down. Now, the Crossman pistol that I described earlier was recovered at the scene. After shots were fired, officers immediately requested medical attention through fire and rescue. They secured Mr. Spencer and began assessing his injuries. A medic arrived within 2 minutes. Case Spring Rescue is very close to this location, and their medic was on site very quickly. Mr. Spencer arrived at Roanoke Memorial Hospital just after 19:33 hours, less than 15 minutes after being shot. He died at the hospital. The medical examiner found the cause of death to be gunshot wounds, as would be expected. There were no drugs or alcohol found in his system during the autopsy. Let's go to this map. Just want to show you an overhead shot of what occurred so you get a little bit of sense of the location and geography. This is the group home where Mr. Spencer was residing. Of course, this is Cave Spring Corners Shopping Center. This is the driveway to Brambleton Avenue where the first contact with a citizen who made the 911 call that you heard was made. So from there, Mr. Spencer proceeded southbound on Brambleton, and the first contact with police officers was in this triangular-shaped median at the corner of Brambleton and 419. And that began the series of pictures that I just showed you. The gun was seen in his hand while he was walking along the roadway past the Walgreens, approaching Normandy Lane, where he passed the van, and the taser deployments and ultimately the shooting occurred just past Normandy Lane. There were no additional 911 calls made during the time from the first call through the shots being fired. There were 2 subsequent calls from people after the shooting that reported being witness or partial witnesses to the events. They were interviewed by investigators during the investigation. They had seen Mr. Spencer in the area, in the shopping center along Brambleton Avenue. One of them had seen him walking along 419 as our officers were following. None of them saw the shots being fired. The results of our criminal investigation, after they were concluded, have been provided to Mr. Leach for review and conclusion of the Commonwealth Attorney, and I'm going to turn that over to him right now.
Thank you, Chief. good morning or good afternoon, whatever time it is now. I am Randy Leach. I'm the Commonwealth Attorney for Roanoke County, and my job in this case is to review the investigation that the Roanoke County Police conducted to determine whether there are any criminal charges that need to be filed. I appreciate the investigation. I have done a number of these reviews before. Several in Roanoke County, one for an incident that happened in Montgomery County. I have never seen a more complete report, a more exhaustive investigation. I've never had to review that much information. And I'll get to the point rather quickly. I have reviewed it all. I have reviewed everything the police have. I have probably reviewed more than I needed to make the determination on the criminal charges. And I want to say that had I seen anything that might have affected my decision differently, I would have asked for a special prosecutor to look at it. But it is quite clear in my mind that these officers were justified in doing what they did. Mr. Spencer, they attempted to tase him twice. They yelled repeatedly for him to put down the gun. He turned and raised the weapon at them. They have to, in their jobs, believe that that's a real weapon. That's the way they're trained, and they felt they had no alternative but to shoot. I would have to put this in front of a grand jury, and I think that would violate the ethical duties I have as a prosecutor. If I don't believe there's probable cause, and I don't think it's anywhere close to that here, I can't present it, and I'm not going to. Had I seen something that gave rise, I would have requested a special prosecutor, rise to doubts, I would have requested a special prosecutor, but there's nothing here. The police were justified. It's a tragedy. I don't know what was going through Kionte Spencer's mind when he just didn't throw the gun down, but after being tased or attempted to be tased twice, and he turned to face them, and then he still would not relinquish the gun and turned to raise it, the officers had no choice. They were doing their job. And that's the conclusion that I've come to, and that's where we stand. So thank you. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. In addition to the criminal investigation, the Police Department Professional Standards Unit, after any incident of this type, conducts an administrative investigation to determine whether the officer's use of force is in compliance with our departmental policy. This is a separate investigation from the criminal investigation. I want to read you our deadly force policy. It's relatively simple. Deadly force may be used when an officer reasonably believes that they or another person is in imminent danger of death or serious physical injury. On February 26, our officers responded to a call of a person brandishing and pointing a handgun. They confronted Mr. Spencer, who was armed with a handgun, at one of the busiest intersections in Roanoke County. Mr. Spencer chose to walk away from the responding officers and refused to comply with directions to drop the gun over a period of approximately 2.5 minutes. After the officers attempted to use less lethal force in the form of a taser, Mr. Spencer turned towards the officers and raised the handgun. This is clearly an imminent danger to the responding officers and to others that might have been in the area. Therefore, we have determined that the officers that fired the shots were in compliance with our use of force policy. They acted in accordance with the training that they have been provided. In fact, they exceeded that suggested training by taking a substantial risk in getting very close to an armed subject to deploy the taser. You need to be approximately 12 feet or less from someone to use that weapon. Unfortunately, police officers are sometimes required to use force, including deadly force. That's never a good scenario, and it's never pretty, frankly, and often, or many times, has a tragic ending. However, it is necessary at times, and at present there is really no way around or no way to avoid the simple fact that force is sometimes needed. During the investigation, there have been a number of key points and questions that have been raised by some of you, by people in our community, and I'm going to walk through what I have is kind of a list of those and see if I can address them. And we'll start with the handgun. Shortly before confronting, or shortly after confronting Mr. Spencer, our officers observed a handgun in his right hand. Now, as you know, it was ultimately found to be a CO2 pistol. Based on the photographs and the video that we have, and the photos that you've seen, we have determined that it was reasonable for both the initial caller and our officers to conclude that was a firearm. In other words, a deadly weapon. The appearance is virtually identical to a 9mm pistol, and our officers, and I think this is a key point, our officers have to respond and react to information and observations that they make at the scene. We have now spent 3 months reviewing decisions that they made in 2.5 minutes. So their conclusions at that time were reasonable. There was no way for them to distinguish that CO2 pistol from a firearm as it was being carried in Mr. Spencer's hand. To suggest that they could have made that determination at that time just is not reasonable. Unfortunately, and I'm going to spend a minute or two on this particular topic, there have been a number of incidents, not just here but in other parts of the country, that involve police officers' use of deadly force and BB guns, pellet guns, guns that appear to be firearms that really aren't. If any of you kind of watch these things, I think in the last year in our state, in Virginia, there's been at least 3. And I'm sharing with you what I've seen in the media, so I'm taking that to be accurate. I read about one last week in North Dakota. I believe a couple weeks ago, one in Baltimore. And actually over the weekend, the AP put out an article that came from Texas about criminals in Texas starting to use pellet guns or BB guns to commit crimes because there's some difference under Texas law in terms of their sentencing. Plus, you can obtain them very easily and very inexpensively. In fact, this morning I went to Amazon.com and I searched the Crossman CO2 pistol, and I believe you can buy that pistol for about $35 on Amazon. The pictures on the marketing do not show any type of red tip or any indication that that may not be a real firearm. I say that because I think the bigger issue is responsible use of that type of gun. It is an instrument that's designed to fire a projectile, but it looks like a firearm, and certainly highlights the need to use them responsibly, and perhaps highlights the need to have a larger discussion about how all these things are happening. So that's issue one. When Mr. Spencer was confronted, he was wearing headphones. That is very plain to see. As we have shown, he turned towards our officers a total of 6 times before he turned and raised the gun. I think it's clear that he was aware of our presence, and I think it's reasonable to conclude that he knew we were trying to stop him. After he was shot, one of our officers removed the headphones. They were not connected to a device. Now, we did recover a cell phone from the scene. It is not possible for us to determine if the headphones could have been connected to that cell phone at the time of the shooting. Apparently, and I'm not one that uses the music very much, apparently when you disconnect the headphones from the smartphone, it turns it off essentially, or disables that function. So we were not able to determine if he had it connected before the shooting or not. However, based on the number of times he turned around, the commands that we were being given, we do believe it's reasonable to conclude that he knew we were trying to stop him. Now, it's been suggested that Mr. Spencer walked along this route frequently, and that his actions on February 26th amount to normal teenage behavior. It's of course possible that he did walk along that route. It's very close to where he lives, so I think that's a reasonable assumption. I've not seen any evidence to suggest that he ever walked along that route carrying a handgun prior to February 26th. Furthermore, to suggest that brandishing a handgun, walking down the street, bandana across your face at night is normal teenage behavior, I think is just simply wrong. I can't think of any place where that would be normal behavior for anybody. It's also suggested that the scarf or bandana worn by Mr. Spencer is being used to support the headphones. I think the pictures show clearly enough that the headphones were over the scarf. And of course, the scarf came up to about the bridge of his nose, so it didn't cover his ears either. As we've already pointed out, our officers went to great lengths to avoid the use of deadly force in this situation. They gave clear and repeated directions. They deployed a taser on 2 different occasions, which required that officer to get far closer to an armed subject than would be considered safe. We did find that the taser was operational. It was not effective. As you've seen, it's likely that the darts struck his backpack or clothing and did not make the required connection to, I think it's called, complete the circuit for the electricity to take effect. One dart was found to be attached to his sweatshirt. So we know that at least one struck part of his body, but it's clear that in neither case was the weapon effective. Given the taser's potential to disable someone when it is effective, that was the best, less lethal choice that our officers had on scene. Had Mr. Spencer not turned and pointed the handgun, there were perhaps other options that could have been used. K-9 was on scene and may have been capable of being deployed had this event continued. A supervisor was en route. Our supervisors are equipped with beanbag weapons. Had this incident continued or a series of events continued, that may have been an option. The first supervisor, by the way, arrived on scene within 3 minutes of the shots being fired, so they were en route at the time. Now, it's been reported that Mr. Spencer has had previous contacts with Roanoke County Police Department. That's true. That does not factor into our decision-making in terms of the actual use of force in this incident, but I want to share with you those contacts. There have been 11 face-to-face contacts between August of 2014 and the incident on February 26th. In August of 2014, there were 2 runaway reports, and that was from a group home in Roanoke. 2 instances in August of 2014. In November of 2014, he was interviewed during a theft investigation at school. That was by an SRO. Nothing came of that in terms of charges. In May of 2015, he was charged with disorderly conduct after a fight in school, again handled by an SRO. In May of 2015, he was the victim of a computer harassment that occurred at school, and the suspect in that case was charged. In December of 2015, he was interviewed regarding possible threats that had made at school that was deemed to be unfounded. Also in December of 2015, we received a call from a citizen stating that a person who turned out to be Mr. Spencer fit the description of a robbery suspect that we had broadcast. That was checked out. Mr. Spencer was not the suspect. Also in December of 15, Mr. Spencer was stopped on the property at Cave Spring Corner Shopping Center very early in the morning, essentially a check on well-being. At that point, a phone call was made to Youth Quest to verify that that was his residence and that he needed to be there. Nothing further came from that. January of this year, he was reported as a missing person from the group home. February of this year, another well-being check. He was observed walking down the middle of the road on Brambleton Avenue. Officer stopped, checked him out, directed him to the side of the road, and that was the end of that. And then in February of 16, he was charged with marijuana possession in school. 5 of the contacts that I've mentioned were handled by school resource officers and occurred in schools. There were pending charges in the marijuana case. I want to point out that none of the 6 officers that responded on February 26th were involved in any of the 11 incidents that I have described. So none of the officers that responded on the 26th had prior face-to-face contact with Mr. Spencer. Finally, it's been alleged that racial profiling led to this incident. There is simply no evidence to support that allegation. We encourage our citizens to report suspicious and dangerous behavior and circumstances in our community, and they do that. Frankly, that is the #1 call for service that we receive in Roanoke County, suspicious circumstances. This call was far beyond that. We expect our officers to respond and confront dangerous situations when they're reported by our citizens. So on February 26th, Mr. Spencer was confronted based on a citizen's call of a person brandishing a firearm. His own actions led to a police use of deadly force against him. Had he acted responsibly or followed our directions, this incident could have been avoided. Now, there have been several additional issues that have been discussed and raised about the way that we have handled this investigation. They are certainly topics of discussion and debate within the law enforcement and criminal justice community, and I will address some of those as well. First, we decided to handle this criminal investigation internally. We did that primarily because we have the capacity to conduct death investigations, and unfortunately, we have to do it somewhat frequently. This is not uncommon for larger departments with the capability to handle these investigations. If there is a task that exceeds our capability, we reach out for outside assistance. We did that in this case with evidence being submitted to the Department of Forensic Science, and we asked the Virginia State Police, and they assisted us in attempting to enhance the video that led to the photographs that you have seen. Unfortunately, the enhancement techniques were not able to make it any clearer than what we have. The distance from the car to Mr. Spencer in the final frames is really what controls how clear the pictures are. We've got highly professional investigators that do their work with a high level of integrity, and I trust them to do it. In this case, the first supervisor arrived on scene within 3 minutes. So there was supervision almost immediately. That supervisor's responsibility and what he did was to secure that scene so that it was preserved for investigators. Our lead investigator is a sergeant, supervisory official, who conducted the investigation under the guidance of the commander of the Criminal Investigation Division. Both of my assistant chiefs and I reviewed this prior to turning it over to the Commonwealth's attorney. So a great deal of review went into this. During the course of the investigation, a total of 5 detectives assisted the lead investigator, and the incident scene was processed by a detective and an officer who are both graduates of the Virginia Forensic Academy. So not very much better qualifications than that. The division of labor in this type of investigation further enhances the integrity by having multiple people involved. As we've already pointed out, the final outcome was determined by the Commonwealth's attorney. He is the independent review. We do not present the investigation to him with conclusions. As he has already told you, that is his job to determine. And it is his review that determines the final outcome. And this would be the case regardless of who conducted the investigation. And on this issue, I finally just want to point out that all the material from this investigation is available to any other lawful investigative authority if that is needed. And I have made the United States Attorney aware of that. We have every piece of information that we have gathered, and if there's a need for them to review it, it will be available to them. Secondly, we are not releasing the names of the officers involved in this incident. I'd like to refer to the Roanoke Times article a few weeks ago that discussed this issue in a great bit of detail, and I was actually glad to see that discussion take place because I learned in that article that under federal law enforcement officials are protected from release of names in that situation. Again, I'm relying on the folks at the Times to have vetted that before they printed it. I didn't do the legal research. The names of people involved in this incident are available to those that have a lawful need to have them. Our investigative staff, Mr. Leach's office, and obviously any additional legal process that could happen, they are available. The investigations that have been conducted concluded that those officers' actions were both lawful and in compliance with our use of force policy. In fact, there is no evidence to suggest that they did anything other than what was necessary in this situation. I will tell you that neither officer has been involved in a prior shooting. We're withholding the names primarily to protect the privacy and security of our officers. We ask our officers to make difficult decisions in dangerous situations. Sometimes these decisions result in unfortunate outcomes. This doesn't make their decisions wrong. There is always threat after this kind of incident for physical violence against officers. In fact, we continue to investigate one threat that was received via the internet shortly after this incident. And unfortunately, we live in a time when internet-based threats and cybercrime seem to be a bigger story than the traditional types of crimes and threats that we've had to deal with. Officers in other parts of the country have been harassed, their identities have been stolen, the identities of their family members have been broadcast with the intention to harass. And none of this is acceptable. That is not an appropriate response to officers doing the job that they have to do. When police officers violate the law or policy, it's our responsibility, and specifically my responsibility, to hold them accountable, and we do that. When they act in accordance with policy, when they act in accordance with their training, it is also our responsibility to stand behind them and defend them and support them. And we are absolutely going to do that. Again, I appreciate the support that we've received from our community during the course of this investigation, and appreciate the fact that we have a great number of people in the community that understand and support what we have to do. While our officers are accountable to both the law and to department policy, no individual or group is entitled to hold them individually accountable to that individual or group's own standards or own beliefs. There is just simply no legitimate need for other people to have the identity of these officers. I will acknowledge that the approach we are taking is different than the approach we took in 2014. That was the last officer-involved shooting in the Roanoke County Police Department. In that situation, I released the first initial and last name of the officer several days after the incident. Unfortunately, times have changed, and the level of internet threat is much, much higher, which requires an additional amount of protection for our personnel. I want to contrast, though, this incident to the incident in 2014 in terms of the amount of information that we have provided. In 2014, I provided you, and I think Amy was on that one, probably the only one here that was, a statement from the scene with the basic details of that incident. Several days later, we issued a press release, and I believe a subsequent press release when Mr. Leach completed his review. That was essentially all the information we provided. In this case, we have given you literally every piece of the timeline that occurred during this incident that led up to Mr. Spencer's death. So, I firmly believe there is a balance to be had here. I think it's important to provide the information and provide the detail about what occurred. I also believe that it's very important to protect our personnel. Finally, we are not releasing the video of this incident. This video has been available to investigators. It's been available to Mr. Leach and his staff, and has been a critical part of the investigation. We've documented and provided you with quite a number of photos at this point, and I meant to go back to that before, that we believe provide an accurate representation of what occurred. We believe that the release of the actual video could result in that video being used inappropriately, being altered, being used to present things that are not really accurate in terms of what occurred. And when the pictures provide the details, that's the appropriate release to make. Early this morning, a member of our staff and a member of Mr. Leach's staff met with Mr. Spencer's adoptive parents to provide them the information that we are giving you now. They have been offered the opportunity to view the videos if they so choose. I don't know if they have made that choice at this point. Just prior to this meeting, we showed the videos to several members of local media outlets with Ms. Whitaker, Mr. Gates, and 2 members of our Board of Supervisors present for that. The purpose was not for those people to judge the outcomes. Well, we have already done that. But was to let them see both the video and the still photographs that we're showing and ask questions, and they did that. These videos are also evidence in both a criminal and administrative investigation. It is our general practice that we do not release evidence to you unless that evidence is needed to help identify a suspect or relates to an imminent public safety need in the county. So I think this is consistent with what we have done in the past. And finally, these videos are graphic. They show the end of someone's life. And I don't believe that that's appropriate for YouTube and trending on social media, so to speak. So in any event, at this point we have provided to you the details of what we know. And simply put, that's that Kionte Spencer's own actions led to a police use of deadly force, which unfortunately resulted in his death. What we don't know is why Mr. Spencer acted in the way he did. And while that isn't necessarily relevant to whether a use of force was justified or not, it does help us to understand, what happened and why it happened, and always has the potential to help us learn how things like this could be prevented in the future. There's no evidence that leads us to a definitive conclusion in this regard. We do know, however, that Mr. Spencer lived a very troubled life. And I'm going to review with you some of his background, hopefully to illustrate what I think is a bigger issue here, and that is mental illness. He was removed from his biological parents at the age of 2 in the year 2000. The records we have, and the records we reviewed, by the way, included documentation from Intercept, documentation from the Henry County Department of Social Services, and one interview that I'll get to at the end from Blue Ridge Behavioral Health. All of that was obtained through search warrants. The records suggest he was removed from his biological parents based on abuse. He was placed in a foster home with a foster family in 2002. From 2010 to 2015, Mr. Spencer was in a variety of mental health treatment programs. From what I can gather from the documentation, from probably a more restrictive type of environment, working the way down to the Youth Quest program, that is kind of a transitional independent living type of approach. Some of the notes in the documentation in terms of his mental health status, and I recognize these aren't medical diagnoses, so to speak, but include impulse control issues, conduct issues, attachment disorder, suicidal ideation, poor reality testing, and attention-seeking disorder. Mr. Spencer arrived in Roanoke in 2012 when he was admitted into the carriage house. I'm going to read you the description of that I took right off of Intercept's website. So if you'd like more on that, you know where to get it. That's described as a therapeutic group home for adolescents ages 12 to 19 in need of a structured therapeutic environment due to behavioral, emotional, or developmental needs. He was removed from that program in 2013 due to some disruptive behavior issues, but was readmitted in 2014. There were notations in 2013 and 2014 that there were suicide attempts, too. He was accepted into the Youth Quest program in October of 2015. Again, the description, Youth Quest is described as services where young adults ages 17 to 21 can reside in a less restrictive arrangement while continuing to receive case management and support focused on independence and self-sufficiency. He turned 18 in October of 2015. In December of 2015, it was noted that Mr. Spencer was not taking his medications on a consistent basis. Those medications included Wellbutrin, Intuniv ER, and Abilify. He stopped taking them completely in December, as a matter of fact. In early January, we found a Facebook posting on his site that included a suggestion that he would, quote, spaz on a cop. Later in January 25th to be exact, he decided that he no longer wished to remain in foster care. Even though he was 18, he had the availability of services, I believe, to his 21st birthday under the way that social services works. At that point, he was given 30 days to make alternative living arrangements. The notes from the staff indicate that they made numerous attempts to assist him in finding another place to go, another place to live. However, he was not receptive to those efforts. His residency at Youth Quest was due to end on March the 1st, so he was just a few days away from probably being homeless. On February 19th, there was another concerning Facebook post that referenced killing somebody, quote, shoot up the whole block, and getting locked up for life. This was, by the way, not information that officers responding to this situation had. He had been suspended from high school. He had been charged with marijuana possession in school and was transitioning to a GED program. Those marijuana charges were pending. And finally, he met with a counselor at Blue Ridge on February 25th, the day before this incident occurred. That counselor was discussing with him his plans for where he was going to live. He indicated that he didn't have any definite plans. He advised them that he did not have any mental health issues and did not need any mental health services at that time. So none of these things provide a clear explanation or definitive answer about why Kionte Spencer did what he did on February 26th. I think, however, it's reasonable to conclude that he was suffering from mental illness. And based on that, plus, the living arrangements which were about to come to an end, pending criminal charges, problems in school, I think it's fair to say in generic, as opposed to perhaps medical terms, that Mr. Spencer was someone in crisis at the time this incident occurred, which I think makes it even more tragic. As a little bit of background, our police department responds to well over 500 calls for service a year, probably a good bit more than that, actually, that relate to mental illness. Media, you have widely reported, and statistics confirm that an increasing number of police officer involved uses of deadly force involve this issue. And I believe it's in the 25 to 30% range if you look at last year's numbers. Our police department, our county, invests substantial resources in trying to find better ways to handle people in crisis and people suffering from mental illness. We have invested heavily, both in time and resources, in crisis intervention team training, or CIT. Better than 80% of our officers have received that training. All new officers receive that training, as do all new officers in Roanoke City, as of the time that we combined our training academies. I want to point out that all 6 responding officers to this incident were CIT trained, every one of them. We continue to work on finding better ways. Some of you who reported on the Smart Policing grant that we currently have with the Department of Justice, working with Intercept and George Mason to find intermediate interventions for people in crisis and people with mental illness. This is also why, not just as a police department, but as a county, we expressed our concerns when there was talk of closing Catawba Hospital. We know that these problems exist in our communities, and there are simply not enough resources to handle them. So I think maybe the bigger issue in this regard is finding appropriate resources and treatment for people that are suffering from mental illness, even when they don't want it, which was the case in this incident, is a problem that has to be resolved by society as a whole. This is not a problem that a police officer or a police department can solve. This is not a problem that can be solved by providing more training to a first responder. It is far, far bigger than that. We deal with the symptoms of the problem. And the reality is this, I think, if the interventions, if the treatment has not been provided, or even if it's available, once a handgun, once a weapon is in someone's hand, it's too late. It's very unlikely at that point that some sort of CIT training or intervention is going to help us resolve that system. And I think as a society, we need to find ways to deal with the underlying problems well before we get to a police officer having to use deadly force. And certainly my fear is that if we can't do that, we're going to continue to see this type of incident occur. And honestly, since February 26th, how many similar incidents across the country have we seen? I practically see an article from someplace almost every week about similar circumstances, and I think that really does highlight that there is a lot of work to do in this issue. So that is our presentation. We think that we have provided you with all of the details around this particular incident. However, Mr. Leach and I are here to try to respond to any other questions that you may have.
Chief, I will say
Yes,
that
sir.
6 officers responded.
Yes, sir.
Of the 6, 2 fired a shot.
Yes, sir.
Could it be said that maybe those 2, forgive the phrase, jumped the gun, considering the other 4 did not feel threatened enough to fire their weapons at the time?
No, I don't think that's at all the case. The 2 officers that fired were the closest to Mr. Spencer. They were in the best position to see the threat as he raised his arms. As I previously said, 2 of the officers were not in a position to see his arms. They were in various locations around that incident scene. And again, as we've said, the review that we've done would indicate that the officers acted as they needed to act.
Chief Paul, you talked about your concerns about there being, the videotape being altered, and that's why you don't want to release it. But talk with me about the public. A lot of people in the public have said that this has been a case that has a lack of transparency. What do you say to those that say you not releasing the tape continues that lack of transparency about this case?
Well, obviously, everybody is entitled to their own opinions, and they are entitled to express those opinions. Based on what we're doing, I think it's relatively obvious that I don't agree with those opinions. I think that immediately after this incident, we did the best that we could do with limited information to provide you and the public the basic facts around what we knew at that time. And we were very careful to provide only information that we felt like would be reliable. As you know, sometimes things change as we do these investigations. At the end of this, we have now provided all the details of what occurred. Yes, we have not released the videos, but I feel like the photographs that we have provided show very clearly what occurred.
Have you offered the NAACP an opportunity to see this video?
No.
Why not?
They are an advocacy group. I understand their concerns. They've expressed their concerns. Our investigation is completed, and we don't have any intention of, other than Mr. Spencer's family, who may choose to do that, showing the video any further.
Then why show the video to members of the media? Why show the video to just a limited number of people? What do you think that says or gives the impression to the community about the police department by only showing it to a limited number of people, including hand-selected members of the media and a few board of supervisors?
The purpose of that was to show the videos to a small number of people, independent of the investigation, that could then see the pictures. And if there's any question about rather what we showed in the pictures was represented in the video, those people are free to speak to that.
Chief, in your internal review, what else did you look at besides the use of force policy? Did you look to see if the officers violated any other policies or procedures for the department?
We look at the entire incident. The focus of the investigation is use of force policy. That is obviously the most critical. We review the entire incident, and now that the investigation is completed, we'll actually do a critique with the people that are involved to identify what they did. Is there anything that we can learn from this from a training perspective? And right off the bat, we consider that officers were confronted with an armed person who was moving, not running away from them, but walking away and not complying with commands. That presents a training issue all by itself. There's not a good way of handling that situation, and certainly when we want to critique how they did that.
Then let me ask you this. On the video that we were able to listen to, the select members, as Bree puts it very appropriately, we hear the officers give commands of, hey, hey, stop, stop now. Is that effective communication for verbal de-escalation?
At this point, we are talking about trying to get someone stopped and ultimately get somebody to drop a weapon.
Are simple one-word commands part of department policy for effective communication with the subject?
We don't have policies that prescribe specific language for our officers to use. I think our officers' approach to this incident was appropriate. I think they used appropriate commands to not only attract Mr. Spencer's attention, but to give him direction. After the handgun was observed, those directions were very clear in terms of drop the weapon, drop the gun, etc. And by my judgment, were delivered in an appropriate tone, certainly loud, certainly authoritative, but that is what's required when confronting an armed subject.
Was there any criteria that those officers who are CIT trained observed that would have led them to believe that they were responding or were in the middle of a response to a potential crisis of a mental health individual?
No.
When you looked at the officers and you listened to the video, one of them specifically asked for the bean bags.
Right.
Will this case change any way that you supply your officers with what they need? Maybe if these officers had those bean bags at the time, they could have used that instead of a live firearm, which may have prevented this situation.
A beanbag would have been a potential option had it been on the scene. We cannot say with any certainty whether it would have been any more effective than the taser. I think the taser had the most probability, but in answer to your first question, we started to review the number of beanbag weapons that we had actually before this incident occurred, and we are in the process of expanding that.
What other changes are coming to the department, either in policy, procedure, resources? Did you find anything? You said you're going to have a critique of the incident. What are some initial findings of things that could be improved or changes to best practices?
I'm not anticipating any policy changes at the present time. Our use of force policy is slightly more restricted than what the law requires us to do. We're not planning any changes in that regard. We are looking at the number of beanbag weapons that are available in the field, and I anticipate that we will increase that sometime in the near future. The purpose of a critique is to allow, for instance, our tactics instructors to view the results of this investigation, which they have not been privy to at this point because of the pending review by the Commonwealth Attorney, to see if from a training perspective there's anything that we would want to suggest in terms of responding to an incident similar to this. At the same time, as you know, there have been a number of recommendations issued by PERF and others around use of force. Many of those we already do. Additional ones we are under consideration. I'll give you a quick example. One of the PERF recommendations is to conduct this type of training with officers who work together on a daily basis. That is not something that we have done before, but it is something that we'll consider in the future. There's some logistical issues with it, but it's something that we think has some promise. At the same time, one of the other recommendations is use scenario-based training for use of force, and we implemented that 2.5 years ago into our in-service program, so that instead of simply focusing on one option, that officers are presented with a broader situation and have to make more decisions. So those types of things are outside of this specific investigation, but we continue to consider, and we'll probably have some implementation of certain parts.
You bring it internally. You bring it do this investigation internally.
We got to take turns here, folks.
So
you and then Gene.
You started this. I'm sorry.
I'm going to let Royale go, and then we'll get you, Gene.
Sorry about that. So you did this investigation internally, and you are confident in your department's resources to handle these things. But
Yes.
considering the times that we're in, with so many officer-involved shootings, why was it decided, same with the Commonwealth Attorney, not to put a separate set of eyes on this to give the appearance to the public that there is no collusion between agencies or the police investigating themselves?
Right. I feel, as you said, very confident in the integrity and professionalism of our investigators. I am, by code, the chief law enforcement officer in Roanoke County. I have the responsibility of conducting criminal investigations in Roanoke County. And I take responsibility for doing that. If I didn't feel that we had either the capacity, the capability, or the people necessary to do it, then we would send it elsewhere. If we don't have there are many unanswered questions about how they should be used, when they should be turned on, when they should be turned off, who should have access to those videos. Now, and also from a technology perspective, we know that this technology is evolving almost every day. And a clear distinction and concern for me about body cameras, as they differentiated from a car camera, is that when our officers activate their lights or siren, that camera automatically comes on. At this point, body cameras are not capable of doing that. You know, I feel there's a very high likelihood that in cases where we might need it the most, that camera doesn't get turned on, and that's going to be a very difficult hurdle to explain. So we have by no means ruled out moving to body cameras at some point in the future. As a matter of fact, I anticipate probably law enforcement in general over the next 5 to 10 years will probably be close to full implementation, but we have not made the decision at this point to do
Wait,
that.
Chief Austin, let me ask this. Taxpayer dollars, people want to know, the public has a right to know, and you're saying that you're not willing to ask for taxpayer dollars to pay for something that may help protect the public as well as your police officers. By having body cameras. Roanoke City has them, Bedford has them, Martinsville has them, surrounding areas have them. Why not here in Roanoke County?
Well, I think I've already explained that. You know, until I'm comfortable that the technology and the process and the legal issues around body cameras are satisfactorily resolved, and this is going to be to my satisfaction, before I go to a county administrator or a county board of supervisors and say we should spend that type of money. I think this is an evolving issue, and there is still much to be learned before I'm ready to make that commitment.
Did all 6 cruisers that responded, all 6 units that responded, have an operable dash camera?
5 of the 6 cars had a dash camera. 1 was not equipped with a dash camera. 1 of the cars, as they approached from the north, passed the incident, and there was no footage from that camera that showed anything that was relevant. The other 4 had pieces of the series of events.
Why don't all of your units have dash cameras?
We're working towards that. It's an expensive proposition, number one. We have committed the funds to do that. It also takes a good bit of work on the part of our radio shop to install those. So as we get new pieces of equipment in terms of the cameras, they are working to install those as new cars come in. Most of our cars at this point are. And of course, there are always going to be times, even at full implementation, when a camera is being serviced or is not functional. So 100% is probably not ever going to happen.
You referenced PERF, which is the Police Executive Research
Right.
Forum. You were at a conference there in August of last year where you spoke against officers responding to subjects in their car and getting right up next to the subject.
Right.
Some of our best angles of Kionte, including showing the firearm that was in his hand, were when officers responded and were very close in their response, getting right up next to him. And certainly the Tamir Rice case in Cleveland kind of highlights this issue. Were you satisfied upon reviewing the video that the officers drove right up to Mr. Spencer numerous times and then got out of their car to try to initiate further contact?
I think the investigation indicates that and shows that that was done because this was a moving incident and they were moving up to try to keep up with him and try to maintain some level of
He
cover.
wasn't running. You could have an officer get out and then try to follow and shout commands and try to get him to obey command.
Well, not when you're trying to maintain cover. I think the officers were making an attempt to try to be safe in their approach. Is that perfect? No. It's never going to be. The comments I made at the PERF conference, and I've been to several since then on this issue, particularly related to the Tamir Rice incident that you mentioned, and actually the incident in Ferguson where the officer drove up to a person in a car and put themselves in a dangerous situation, which could have contributed to what occurred. In this case, our officers did drive up closer than is probably safe to do, but I think they were using appropriate judgment in terms of trying to handle a very critical incident and responding to an armed subject who was walking away from them and trying to maintain some semblance of cover as they were doing that. So did they take some risks? Absolutely. Do I think that they were inappropriate risks? I do not.
No discipline at all for any of the
No.
officers? And had any of the officers had any instances of any type of use of force before while they were employed here in Roanoke County?
One, I don't have that information in front of me, and two, I'm not going to release personnel information about the officers other than they were, neither one, involved in a prior shooting.
I have a question for Randy. You had said in our earlier meeting that it would be irresponsible of you to have an outside investigator come in and review everything that the county and you have done. What is it that makes that, why do you think this is such an open and closed case, and why not just protect yourself by having one more outside agency look at it?
First of all, I don't think I need protection. I'm doing my job, and I think I'm doing it the way it's supposed to be done. If I see something that would cause pause, if people say, why is Mr. Leach doing this, or why is he doing that, I might very well consider it if there is an appearance of a conflict of interest. But that's not the case here. I did review it with myself and two of my senior assistants, listened to what they had to say, and we agreed. First of all, I'm elected to do this job, and the citizens of the county would rather have me do this job, I think, than sign off on it and just bring in somebody else, because that's the easy way to go. And I'm not going to take the easy way. I'm going to look at it no matter what. If at that point I see some actual conflict, I would call some win. I didn't see that.
What is it about this that makes you think it's such an open and shut case?
The fact of everything I've seen, that these officers weren't given a choice. They were not given a choice. And I fully believe from my review of all the evidence, Kionte Spencer knew they were there. He'd had that gun in his hand less than 3 hours, and he's out waving it around and pointing it at people, and they try and tase him, and they try and do everything else, and then he turns on them with the gun. That's why I think it's not open and shut. It's a tragedy, but it's a tragedy he brought on himself.
Chief, I'm wondering,
Sure.
post the incident, I wonder if anybody talked to any mental health evaluator that saw this and figured and asked, was this suicide by cop?
I have not seen any evidence that would clearly suggest that. I don't think it's something that we could rule out, but again, there are no statements attributed to Mr. Spencer or any social media posts attributed to Mr. Spencer or anything of that nature that would definitively point us in that direction.
Why couldn't you guys wait for the beanbag gun to? He didn't seem like he was becoming more agitated, with the taser thing. I mean, he spun around a few times, but he wasn't like going for anybody. So why couldn't they wait?
He turned around and pointed a gun at him. At that point, you can't wait. The officers made 2 attempts to use a taser. In terms of the less lethal weapons that we have, I believe that the taser was the most likely to be effective. It wasn't in this case. But the fact is, no less lethal weapon, or weapon of any kind for that matter, is 100% effective. After that was done, for whatever reason, Mr. Spencer turned, faced our officers, raised his arm with that gun in his hand. At that point, he presents an imminent threat, and the officers acted appropriately.
How many
Just for
total
those that don't
citizens
know, what-
did you interview as part of your investigation?
There were 2 people that called 911 after the shots had been fired. There were another 2 people that were driving by. They didn't call 911 afterwards. They turned around and came back to the scene and alerted our personnel. There was obviously the person who made the 911 call in terms of witnesses that were at the scene.
But how many were interviewed after the fact by the person who was conducting the criminal?
All of those people were interviewed after the fact. We also interviewed people at Intercept, people that lived with him. And that's not necessarily goes to the use of force, but for the background information, those folks were also
And
interviewed.
did you have any citizens who said that they actually observed the precise moments before the officers fired their shots?
No.
Are all 6 of these officers back on, they're back on the street?
Yes,
Okay. And it was total 6 placed on administrative leave?
yes. Were you finished, Gene?
I want to ask you one more question. The last, where the still frame or even the video, I see his left arm coming up, but he had the gun in the right arm.
Yes.
And are you saying that the officers that involved, that he actually brought his gun up, because he was doing a lot of waving around before that.
Right.
But they actually definitively saying that he started to bring his gun up?
Yes.
Because it's really hard to tell from the video.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And it's very hard to tell from the still picture. There's absolutely no question about that.
But they definitively said he was bringing
Yes.
his gun up.
And how are officers trained, with your policy, how are officers trained to handle that imminent danger? How are they trained to shoot? Where are they trained to shoot?
Our officers, and I think virtually every law enforcement officer, is instructed to shoot for essentially center mass. That's the biggest target, obviously, and also the most likely area to disable. They are using deadly force to end the threat.
You've been getting emotional when talking about defending your officers, the community also outpouring in support
Right.
of the officers. It's remarkable to me to see you, in my prior interactions, you know, a very stern, stoic individual, to get emotional over this. So tell me how this case has really weighed on you, and I'm sure weighed on the individuals who responded to this critical incident.
Well, anytime something like this happens, this is a stressful situation for everybody in our police department. Frankly, it's a stressful situation for the people in the Emergency Communications Center who took that call and then listened to this play out. We all have a responsibility subsequent to that. You know, our officers have the responsibility to, excuse me, participate in an investigation. Now, as I've told you, they participated in interviews for the criminal investigation voluntarily, which is not unlike anybody else being interviewed for a criminal investigation. You don't have to do it. They have the obligation to participate because it's a compelled situation in an administrative interview. They're also dealing with the fact that a life was lost. And we do, by the way, before they're released back to work, provide them with peer counseling from the Virginia Law Enforcement Assistance Program, and also clearance from our psychological services provider, who, you know, ultimately says they're capable of coming back to work or not. But the 2 officers who fired, the 6 officers who responded to this have been under a microscope for 3 months. So that certainly weighs on, you know, what they're having to deal with. You know, and I got to make sure all that stuff happens. Now, I got to make sure that what we do is a thorough and complete investigation, and if accountability is required, then we're going to do that. But at the same time, when our officers do something right, I'm going to stand up here and say they do something right, and I'm going to stand up and say we're going to support them.
Chief, the fact that 2 officers fired, did they fire simultaneously? Did they reach the same conclusion based upon their training, based upon what they observed in the position that they were in? Or did one fire and then the other fire in support of the other? How does that work?
Well, you saw the video,
Right.
and you heard the shots. They are very, very close together. I don't think we have a mechanism to time something that happens that fast. So, you know, I think it's safe to say they were both prepared to fire, and then when they both felt that, or, excuse me, individually felt that there was an imminent danger of serious injury or death, they made the decision to fire.
Chief, the consensual encounter that Spencer had with police, you said the second time in December, at Cave Spring Corners, that was Christmas Day. Do you have a specific date?
There was one on Christmas Day. That was when he was stopped in the parking lot at Cave Spring Corners. That was about 3 in the morning, so that would have been 3 in the morning, Christmas morning.
Would that have been the same platoon or a different platoon?
No, that had been a different platoon. No, as I said, none of the 6 officers that respond to this incident had any prior face-to-face contact with Kionte Spencer.
Was there any information put into any type of computer system that the county maintains about Kionte himself? As if an officer were to go onto a call knowing that it was Kionte, was there any information that would have been?
No, there was no hazards listed for him. The contacts that we had, 11 from, what was it, 2014, and I forget what month, to February of 2016, sounds like quite a few contacts, and frankly it is. Many of us go through our entire lives without having face-to-face contact with a police officer, maybe outside of a traffic stop. But comparatively, there are a lot of people that have a lot more contact than he did. And frankly, the contacts that I described to you were, for the most part, relatively generic. Runaway, not uncommon for a teenager to be involved in, particularly, when there's mental health issues. A charge for possession of marijuana, but a very minor criminal charge. So there was nothing indicated from any of the prior calls that he presented any kind of hazard. So there wasn't anything, documented in that regard.
Was he complying with police encounters, or any notes of him again disregarding?
Everything I have from these encounters is that he was complying. There were, I think, a total of 2 charges that were placed. There was a juvenile charge for disorderly conduct. So that's occurring after the fight's over in the school. SRO's taking care of that incident. The marijuana charge, I was also in the school, so they were not hostile types of encounters. And of course, on a runaway, the face-to-face encounter occurs when the person has returned home. And we're simply verifying that that's happened, or we have found them someplace and are helping them to get home. So no prior hostility that I'm aware of.
Will you disclose the sex of the 2 officers who fired shots?
I'm not going to say anything more about the officers than what I've already have.